What's the worst thing you've had or seen done by someone who was supposed to be a professional? Dentists will appreciate this one. My girlfriend at the time was unhappy with the appearance of her teeth, and rather than go with orthodontics, which my very professional dentist had recommended, opted to go with the instant solution of crowns and veneers, nearly a dozen in all, suggested by a dentist at some random strip mall. Doing this work required she get 6 root canals. Her first appointment for the work was a Friday at about 2 p.m. They worked on her for 3 hours, and when it was 5 p.m. and it was quitting time, they stopped work, put a temporary bridge on her and said they'd see her in 2 weeks, when her next appointment was scheduled, and sent her home. Once the lidocaine wore off, she was in agonizing pain. By Sunday she literally asked me to kill her. Calls to the dentist service went unreturned. Monday morning she called and was told the pain was normal and they wouldn't see her earlier. That afternoon I called my dentist, explained the situation and brought her in immediately. He gave her some lidocaine which provided instant relief, and then took the temporary bridge off. Next he said out loud holy crap and told his assistant to get the camera, and took about 50 pictures. He left and went into his office, and then came back, put the temp back on, gave her a script for Percocet, and told us to call her dentist again and make an appointment. We did, and it was scheduled for 7 a.m. the next morning. Apparently they had started 6 root canals on Friday, but not completed any of them. Just opened the tooth and exposed the nerve, but not actually destroyed it, and left the tooth open with a minimal packing but no actual filling, and expected my girlfriend to live with that for 2 weeks with no pain meds. I talked with my dentist about it on a later date, and according to him this was about the single most painful thing a dentist could do to a person, and had they not taken the appointment the next morning he was going to hand the pics over to the state's ethics review board. TLDR, bad dentist tortured my girlfriend. Had a gynecologist cough straight into my vag, didn't cover her mouth, didn't turn away, just spread my legs and coughed. Had a gynecologist tell me I was a S for having an IUD and that's why I was having unrelated health issues. He retired several months later, so I'm hoping he was just going senile and wasn't actually that mean. Girlfriend's parents saved money on their room addition by hiring a handyman to install the bathroom fixtures instead of a plumber. He mixed up the hot and cold pipes. It's really odd to sit on a toilet full of hot water, feeling the steam rise on your butt. Sounds like it would be strangely luxurious in winter. I was abused as a child. My nun teachers reported it 3 times but the police took no action. I fell down a flight of stone steps and got badly bruised. When I went into school one of the nuns asked me what happened. She got angry and slapped me for lying thinking I was covering up abuse. Yes, slap the kid that's being abused. Excellent. S. I had a teacher in college that took points off my essay for misspelling ludicrous. She didn't know it was a real word and thought I was referring to a pop artist. Had a professor lose my final. When I emailed him about why I was failing, he said, well, you should have been there for the test. After trying to convince him I wasn't, him not believing me, I showed up to his office and demanded he allowed me to go through the scantrons. He threw the pile at me and rolled his eyes, thinking I was using this as a last resort. Nope. Almost 1,200 scantrons later I pulled mine out and put it on his desk. I made him run it through the machine as I watched. Granted, I understand that he had a lot of students and sometimes scantrons get misplaced, but he shouldn't have been so disbelieving and rude over it. A doctor once prescribed me beta blockers to treat anxiety. On my follow-up appointment I asked him about one of the side effects. He asked me what drug I was on. I explained it was the one he had prescribed the week before and told him the name of it. Dude proceeds to open a book of prescription drug information and then tell me I probably shouldn't be taking it because it could be dangerous. I haven't been back. I'm a bike courier and watched the clerk of the US District Court show the latest Lisa NP clip to all his co-workers while he was supposed to be completing my filing. I sat there, collected wait time, and counted my money. I had wrecked my mountain bike on a South Mountain trail and ripped open my arm pretty good. I also broke 2 rims, cracked my helmet, and blew out my front shock. I was in and out of consciousnesses on the road to urgent care. Because it was early Sunday morning, the first 2 places we went to were closed and we ended up at a little clinic. This young doctor, 3 years out of med school, cleaned my wound, pulled all the rock and dirt out of my skin, and then stitched up the large flap of skin that was torn back. He gave me 2 pain pills and told me to have a good day. Well, apparently you are not supposed to stitch wounds up like that and are supposed to let them drain breath. I went in 2 days later to get more pain pills because my arm hurt so bad it was keeping me up at night. The doctor on staff told me I had to be admitted to a hospital with an ER immediately because my whole arm was infected and it was starting to reach my lungs. I had a massive infection that ended up hospitalizing me for days, and then I had to have a surgery where they removed a good part of my forearm tissue to let it all regrow. I spent more than a month packing and cleaning out a dollar-sized wound as my tissue regrew. Worst experience of my life. To answer the most common question, no, I did not sue. We thought about it, but figured that would only contribute to the broken healthcare system. I guess I came to terms like this: the doctor had to learn somewhere. There are always people graduating at the bottom of the class. I saw a surgeon ream the frick out of some med student for something really freaking inane. Her tone when she spoke to him, I mean straight up over the top evil freaking boss balls, and she just stood there looking at her shoes taking it. I mean, this guy was a dong. Don't you dare talk to me like we're equals. Who the frick do you think you are? WHO are you? You want to play with men, sweetheart? Sorry frick, you don't tell me you're sorry. That kind of crap. You just described 99% of all surgeons. They are nice to the patients most of the time but absolutely horrid to the staff. Nurses get it even worse than the med students. Professional roofer didn't seal the roof off properly at the end of the day. It rained that night. My parents' attic filled with water. We had a roofer set his nail gun incorrectly. Within a year we had nail pops everywhere and a very leaky roof. Babysitter dropped my little brother, breaking both of his arms. Even worse, she made him stop crying and just covered him with a ton of blankets. When my parents got home, she just took the money and left without a word. My parents didn't find out until later, when my brother just kept quietly sobbing but couldn't move his arms. I'm from Spain and my parents are from Spain as well. I speak Spanish without any accent. Not even a local accent. I speak like people on national TV. I'm white. There is no reason for anyone to think I'm a foreigner. But I have a French first name, followed by the 2 most common Spanish last names. So I once had a consultation with a psychologist. She had my medical history before the consultation. The first thing she asked me was if I was having a hard time adapting to the country. I told her I'd always lived here, but I had a French name because my mom moved to Switzerland when she was 18 and moved back to Spain to give birth to me, so she was used to French names. So, she asked me if my parents were having a hard time adapting to the country. I told her again that my parents were Spaniards who had briefly spent time in Switzerland 25 years ago. Then she asked me again if I was finding Spain very different from my home country. At this point I started being irritated, but went along with it because I wanted psychiatric treatment and she was the one who had to refer me. During the 45-minute session she asked me several times if I was having a hard time adapting and made numerous references to my status as an immigrant. To this day I still don't know if she was crazy, on drugs, or just not listening to me. Sounds like your problems are related to culture shock to me. A sign language interpreter was working in a classroom. She had only one deaf customer, so instead of doing her work, conveying the message between spoken and signed language, she flirted the entire time with the guy who was sitting next to the deaf student. Oh yeah, I had that happen in one of my college classes. But in my case, the guy was also deaf, and he didn't care about the class because it wasn't a requirement for his major. So the interpreter he flirted via sign for a few classes until I complained because I was getting too far behind on the coursework trying to lip read the teacher. The next week we had a new interp. Guy was not happy. When I was working for an oil change place I witnessed the manager of 15 years not put oil in the car and send it on its way. I was working in the pit at a 2-bay store. While I was changing the diff fluid on another car, waiting for the oil to drain, the manager did this without checking to see if it was ready. I didn't even get to put the plug back in. WTF are you doing? It wasn't even ready to put oil in it. The plug is still here. Oh, I thought you were done. You didn't even check if I was done. We later found out that he had just started a addiction and was fired as well. That happened to my car once. My car overheated a day later and started smoking. Went back to the place where I had my oil changed and they pretended to not even know who I was despite me waving a receipt in their face. My wife went to a professional conference out of town when she was 7 months pregnant with our first child. It was about a 4-hour drive from home and she was a little concerned, so she asked me to go with her. She didn't consult with her OB-GYN. While we were there, her water broke. We went to the local hospital and they said she was going to be bedridden for the next several weeks. So unless we wanted to stay there, we should get in the car and drive like heck back to our hometown. When we got home we went directly to the hospital and they admitted her. They kept her in a bed with her feet higher than her head and checked her several times a day for infections. Her OB-GYN was nowhere to be found. My wife was an RN at the same hospital where she was staying. Her friends, other RNs, would come by and chat with her frequently. They let her know that the OB-GYN was mad at her for leaving town without telling him and bitching to everyone in the hospital about her. After she'd been there for a couple weeks, the OB-GYN showed up. I was in the room, along with several of her friends. He smelled strongly of alcohol. He walked up to the bed without saying anything while pulling on a glove. He pulled up her gown and jammed his hand in while everyone was standing there. He then made a few incomprehensible sounds and stormed out. We didn't see him again for a couple weeks. The tests for infection finally came back positive, so they were going to induce labor. Her OB-GYN showed up and even though the staff doctors said she could deliver normally, her doctor insisted she needed a cesarean section. My wife was really disappointed, but we went along with what he said. We later found out he wanted her to have a cesarean because he had a tea time that afternoon and didn't want to miss it. I wanted to complain, but he was the head of obstetrics at the hospital and my wife was she there would be repercussions to her job if we did. When I was a teenager I ended up having to have my first root canal at a new dentist because my father had switched insurance plans. Everything started out normal, but after about an hour into the procedure the dentist told me that she needed to step out for a moment. At that moment, I still had one of those metal filing toothpicks stuck up into my tooth, so she told me not to close my mouth. I sat there and kept it open for over a freaking hour. Apparently she had gone off to do a procedure on another patient because my root canal had run over the time she had allotted for it. Surprise, surprise. My tooth had somehow become infected in this time and I had to wear a temporary crown for a week and not eat anything that wasn't room temperature while I took antibiotics. When I finally got a permanent crown, it ended up being the brightest shade of white that they had. I still haven't been able to get my other teeth to match it without professional whitening. It should be mentioned that this lovely dentist was Uli Tates, the lawyer dentist who later went on to become the head of the Obama birther movement. I was a little surprised when I saw her on CNN a few years back. Horrible dentist, horrible lawyer, horrible human being. An electrician touching exposed wiring to see if it was on. I should also mention that he had only 3 fingers left on that hand. I once saw a professional fire dancer use a fire whip and accidentally set his own hair on fire. He proceeded to flip the frick out. Having known too many fire performers, lighting yourself on fire has happened to everyone. Normally you're not a dumbass about it and just put it out and keep going. This story is why I always wore a hat. I only ever managed to burn the longest parts of my hair and my winter hat smells deliciously of Kiro. My husband worked with a cook that was nasty, looked dirty, drank during work hours and ate all the jamon iberico, 50-60 year kg. He claimed to have owned a restaurant before. One day my husband went into the kitchen just in time to stop this guy pressing the start button on the microwave with a huge metal tray inside. When my husband started yelling at him, the guy asked how was he supposed to know you can't put metal inside a microwave oven. Just because they owned a restaurant doesn't mean it was successful or good. One of my history teachers in high school was a complete douche. He looked like the villain in Air Bud. Red hair, Charlie Brown bulb of hair in the front with a mustache. He had done things like try to rip my papers apart when I stapled the wrong two together, ripped one in half and made me tape it back together. completely hated the guy. One day he brought his daughter to school and she wasn't acting the way he wanted. He locked her butt in the closet in the classroom. The entire school heard about it. When I was around 14-15 we moved to a new apartment and I made a new friend. She was around my age and we hung out all the time. We would walk to the corner store a lot and she would go in the back room for lengths of times as I waited. I always wondered what she would do in the back room, but she would change the subject and I didn't worry too much since she wouldn't get in trouble and she was the only friend I had at the time because it was summer and I had just moved. Later I saw her coming out with a cop. She didn't know I was at the store. When she saw me she told me everything and told me not to tell anyone. Story is she'd been sleeping with this cop for the past 3 months. He works security at the convenience store as a part-time. He was an actual police officer. I stayed quiet but couldn't believe how someone that was there to protect us was sleeping with a 14-15-YO in the back of the store. Also how the owners allowed it and looked the other way. Worst part is he became really good friends with her mom. She never suspected a thing. He used his uniform to earn trust and abuse his power. She was in love with him. I stopped hanging out with her so much and we moved a couple of months later. Story time. I was taking courses via distance in order to complete my university degree. One particular class was an economics class. The professor that semester was filling in for the regular prof and had never taught via distance before and was using the regular prof's materials. No big deal. It's really not that hard. So midterms roll around. We write the multiple choice midterm and our proctors mail it back in. Being as there are people across the country, and often in other countries, taking the course, the tests take a while to come back and be graded. Cool. So one day we log into the online courseware and see that our grades are posted, along with a very long and ranty email from the professor. The entire class failed the midterm. She insisted that she double and triple check the answer key, and it was right, and that she never had such a thing happen before. She also admonished us for not studying hard enough and that we really had to work to pass the final. As you can imagine, there was nothing but uproar amongst the class. No one could believe that not even one person didn't pass the midterm. So we waited for the midterms to be returned to us. Along the way she decided to compromise and offer us a very fair final. Double all midterm marks so they were where they should be and use the better mark between the two for the course grade, as long as the final was passed. Now, it's 3 weeks before the final, and everyone is flipping the frick out to ensure we completely understand the material. Online study groups are created. Questions and discussions abound. Then midterms began arriving back at students' homes. We began posting questions about the answers. Why was X wrong for questioner? The professor gave very lengthy and detailed answers for the first few that had been posted. We were confused. The answers she had given us were to questions that weren't on our midterms. The professor went silent, after berating us for being idiots and insisting it wasn't her fault. The professor profusely apologized for inadvertently correcting all the exams using the answer key for a different version of the exam. Best clusterfuck ever. Let me start by saying I've had a peanut nut allergy since infancy. So now, story time. When I was in preschool there was a day that they were serving PB&J sandwiches. Me being the smart little squeaker I was, I called attention to the fact that I can't eat the PB&J because I'm allergic to peanuts. One of the teachers came over to me, grabbed my sandwich, opened it up, and wiped the side with mostly peanut butter against the edge of a table and put it back together and gave it to me. I gave her a dead confused and repulsed stare, followed by a courteous, "Can I have something else please?" The girl then fetched me broccoli and cheddar soup, I think, and I ate that instead with pride. Later, of course, I told my mother, who rose all of heck. I mean seriously, WTF. Not only should my teachers have known my allergies, but they should have had the fricking sense to know that even the smallest amount of peanut butter will still in fact cause an allergic reaction. Electrician who claimed he could do network cabling added 3 network points the same way you'd added power sockets, by running a spur from one existing network point. The result? 4 network points in the office. Perfect in every way except that you could only use one at a time. That's actually pretty funny. I'm surprised he even had the equipment to splice wires of such a high gauge. When I was 6 I was sent to a therapist for ADHD. He decided to give me 11 different medications over the course of a few months. They made me appear to be completely insane. My behavior became strange and violent. My parents eventually made me a day patient at the local asylum because they caught me talking to things that weren't there. Thankfully the therapist there got me off the cocktail and told my parents to sue the original therapist. I still remember the nightmares, hallucinations that would blend together. What the frick? After some severe bleeding I went to the ER to see if maybe I had a miscarriage. Up to this point there hadn't been any reason to think I may have been pregnant. The doctor ran a test and came back to tell me, "Congratulations, you are fertile myrtile." And yes, it miscarried. When I was a teen, I went to the ER because I had been bit by a cat. The doctor told me I should take antibiotics and asked me what kind I wanted. To clarify, I'm not a doctor nor was I one at age 13. I told the psych doctor in a mental facility that I had mood swings sometimes but that they were always caused by something and were not random. Then he asked me if I ever saw or heard things. I said, aside from 2 or 3 of those minor unreal images we all have when we are trying to wake up, nothing. That was probably the wrong thing to say, because then he diagnosed me as having schizoaffective disorder. It tore my parents apart and I had to explain to them several times that this guy was full of crap and blowing things out of proportion. Fortunately my next doctor wasn't so quick to rush to judgment. My coworker doesn't know how to transfer calls. She just tells people to hang up and call us again and ask the receptionist for someone else. I have a coworker that does that too, but he looks, on the transfer sheet, to tell them what extension to dial when they call back. I guess that transfer button that is right there on the phone isn't big enough for him. In my defense, myself and our receptionist have already showed him how to transfer. He just forgets. I was subbing for a teacher's aide one time, and she kept pronouncing the word chameleon. The word was chameleon. This was the teacher. To anyone asking, I'm not making this up based on what's apparently an episode of Him. This was an actual experience I had while working at an elementary school. She was reading a book to the students about a chameleon searching for friends and changing his color to fit in. My health teacher would pronounce groin as groin and when we corrected her she just stared over her glasses and said, "Well, that's how it's spelled." I work as a summer rec director for the local school district, so I basically spent my days watching 30 children of various ages run around a playground and get into trouble. Now some of these kids have special needs and in that case may have a aide to help keep an eye on them. One day some boys about 10 found a hornet's nest in the ground and unknown to me decided to poke it with a stick. This peed the bees off, understandably, so they started to swarm around the area. I realized and started warning the kids to stay away. While I did, a boy named Tim with autism started wandering over oblivious to the problem and my shouts. His aide just stood there and freaking watched him do it. I ran across the park, gobbed him and carried him away slapping bees the whole time. He got stung 5 times, twice in the face. The aide said she had a phobia of bees and didn't want to get too close. To clear up any confusion, it was a yellow jacket nest to be specific. I'm not sure if they are technically hornets or wasps, but wherein from people commonly refer to them as hornets. When I call them bees I'm quoting the aide who was incorrect. This is part of the reason I don't think she had an actually phobia but instead, like most people, felt anxious around stinging insects. That and the many other times she was dangerously irresponsible while doing her job. I have nothing against people with legitimate phobias. Whoa, what a C. Way to go below, and well within the call of duty. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.